I want to give a very special thank you to the SRE network. SRE stands for Safety, Respect, and Equity, for being invested in conversations that address gender-based violence and Torah learning that is compassionate and restorative. And I'm going to explain a little bit what that means. But they are an amazing communal resource. Please take time to check them out at srenetwork.org. We'll put their website in the chat. For the past year, SVIVAH has been working with SRE to create something called restorative Torah. And I put that in quotes because I think we're still experimenting with figuring out what that means. But the idea behind this restorative Torah project is to create rooms of Torah learning that don't shy away from hard conversations. Conversations around gender-based violence, abuse, sexual assault, institutional abuse, bystanding, upstanding, you name it. We all know that this is part of our lives and lived experience as women, either for ourselves or for people we know and love. It's a part of our lives and it's a part of our communities. And together with SRE, we wanted to make a space for the Torah that addresses these hard things. This is Torah that we need to learn too. And no matter how hard it is to stay in it, no matter how much easier it would be to whitewash it or look away, this is Torah too. So while tonight's conversation won't address these topics in depth, there is an underlying current of power imbalance, the threat of violence, that runs through this Shavuot text that we're going to be talking about tonight. And we know that it's sometimes actually really awful to touch on a topic and not open it up all the way. That sometimes it can be worse to do that than not even mentioning it at all, which is why we're really looking forward to being able to bring some more expansiveness to these conversations with a new addition to the SVIVAH universe with Her Spirit conversations that we're going to get to build with the help and support of the Covenant Foundation. We are planning a second session, a second gathering in the coming weeks, one that will serve as a complement to our learning tonight, where we will take a closer look at what the marginalization of women's voices looks like in our communities today, what it takes to be an upstander today, what are the consequences, both positive and negative, of seeking out the voices that are hard to hear. And we really hope that you'll join that conversation because your voices will be critical to that one. So please stay tuned for that. I'm really glad that we're going to have more time together. Look, this is what I need you to hear from me tonight. And after this, I promise I will stop talking. These conversations, this learning, it feels messy. It feels hard. It feels exciting and hopeful. And also, certainly for some of you here tonight, it can feel awful and insulting and infuriating, or God forbid, even additionally hurtful. I am that person, for those of you who know me, who is such a people pleaser that the idea of hurting someone, especially when I don't mean to, is enough to make me run in the absolute other direction and never open my mouth again. But we can't do that. We have to have these conversations. We have to build these rooms where we can hear each other and learn from each other, where we can disagree and be confused and unsettled and uncomfortable, because we can't build this better world that we want without first listening to each other and learning each other's Torah. And that is the essence of what HerTorah is all about. I want to say to you the following things. Number one, I'm sorry. Something tonight is going to sit funny or feel lousy or not honor your story. Please know that that is the last thing we intend. Please know that we mean well and want to do better for you, for all of us. Please let me ask you for your patience, your understanding, and your forgiveness. Tonight will not be perfect, but we are always wanting to learn and improve. Number two, I feel very comfortable saying that this is a room where all of us are showing up with arms open. We intend to hold each other because that is how we come together. And even in moments of stickiness, please know that we want to hold you as best as we can. 3, take care of yourself, please. Take care of each other, but take care of you. If tonight is not a space that feels good or right, do what you need to be gentle with you. We care about you and what you need to do to take care of you. And last, please know that we are committed to SVIVAH being a space where we strive to listen to all of your stories, where your experience is important and valued, where we see you, we believe you, and we stand with you. Our educators tonight are so wonderful. I am beyond grateful to them for how they live, teach, and share their values every day. Our partner tonight, SRE, and the resources that we'll share later are also committed to those same values. Tonight will definitely not be everything, but it will definitely be a start. And as always, your feedback is so welcomed so that we can continue to do better. Everything about SVIVAH is about building a better kehillah, a community that does what it's supposed to support us and nourish us. And I hope tonight will be a step in building that ideal community. And I hope that each one of you will step in and help us do that. I want to introduce Dr. Hadar Schwartz, a trauma-informed psychologist with significant expertise in supporting survivors of sexual abuse and assault. She works frequently with Sacred Spaces, one of the amazing organizations working so hard to address and prevent abuse in our Jewish communal institutions. You'll see Dr. Schwartz's full bio and contact info in the chat. Dr. Schwartz, thank you so much for being here with us tonight, for helping us navigate this conversation and our follow-up conversation in a few weeks. I would love to ask you to share a little bit about the work that you do with Sacred Spaces and the work that Sacred Spaces does in building that better world that we dream of. And if you don't mind, can you help us walk into this conversation tonight with a generous mindset?
Hi, thank you for having me. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. And I see that Shira Berkovitz is here too. So I speak about the small piece of Sacred Spaces that I am engaged in, of this really amazing work that she and her whole team do. So I am asked at times to work with organizations that want to be proactive in thinking about preventing abuse and creating safe spaces. At times I might work with an organization in particular that wants to respond sensitively and helping an organization do that. And I feel really grateful to be able to bring individuals' stories. I carry, each experience that I've heard and been honored to be let into along with me, and try to bring those stories into not only really helping that individual, but helping make the world one that will feel more supportive and safe and caring for the next individual. So
thank you so much. I'm so grateful that you're here tonight. Thank you for helping us hold this space. And I know we'll hear more from you later. Thank you. And now I get to introduce one of my favorite teachers, Rabbi Aliza, director and visionary behind everything that is HerTorah and so much more. Her bio will be in the chat. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Ariella. Hello, everybody. It's great to see you. Ariella, and a special thank you to you, because not only did you do such a wonderful job putting together tonight, but I know that you have 3 children who are sick at home, and you still put tonight together, and you still worked on it, and you made it happen. So thank you. And also Ariella's children, come on, get it together, please, and just get better. Okay, I hope that works, Ariella. It is so nice to see everybody here tonight. I hate being spotlighted. Just one second. Okay, it's really wonderful to see you. I'm so happy that we get a chance to learn together tonight. The Book of Ruth and Shavuot just happen to be among my favorite things. I just love it. And I was thinking about why. And I think it's because, so often in Torah, we have stories about people who get things wrong. and we learn from what they got wrong what we're supposed to do right. But the Book of Ruth, on the whole, is about what people did right and the ways that we can live up to the good things that they did and the ways that we would like to be. And it's all over. It's Ruth, it's Naomi, it's Boaz, it's the society, as I think we'll talk about a little bit in this session tonight. I wanted to just add on to Ariella a little bit and say that tonight is about doing some deep learning about the Book of Ruth, about what it means to really listen when somebody comes to you with a disclosure or a complaint or a claim that is not comfortable for you to hear. And I think that in general tonight, there are going to be some things that are just not comfortable for us to hear. It might be that we're talking about the Book of Ruth, where Ruth is heard, you know, and maybe you've gone through an experience where you made a disclosure and you were not heard. Or maybe you're in an institution where you did the best you can and you feel like nobody appreciated what you did. Maybe there are going to be things, different perspectives tonight that you agree with and some that you disagree with. And that's part of being a Kihila Kadosha, a holy community. That means that we don't always agree with everything, but we have open hearts and we listen to each other. Just like all of us stood at Mount Sinai and we were all different, but we all heard the Torah together. So I hope that we can approach that tonight in the same way, with open hearts and love and a giving spirit toward each other. I am so happy that I get to introduce our speakers tonight. I want to introduce first Rabbi Sarah Mulhern. Rabbi Sarah Mulhern serves as the rabbi of base. Is it Lincoln or do you just say LNCLN? Lincoln. Okay, good. Opening her home and her heart to young adults in Lincoln Park, Chicago. She passionately believes that Torah matters and that Judaism can enrich human life and better society. Sarah is also a faculty member of the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America and a nationally regarded teacher of Torah. You can see the rest of her bio in the chat. I just want to add that this Shavuot, Sarah will be making her one dairy meal of the whole year because she's got some lactose intolerant people in her home. So just another biographical fact that you probably won't find elsewhere about Sarah. All right, Sarah, thank you so much for being with us.
What an intro. So nice to be with you all. Really excited to be here. I can never say no to Aliza in general, but in particular, I'm someone who likes to think a lot about how Torah can reflect and lift up the very common human experiences around sexual violence and sexual marginalization, and really powerful to think about how Torah can be a tool to make our communities either less safe or safer, depending on how we deploy it and how we learn it, and to be a part of a learning community that is really doing that in a healthy and holy way is such a joy and an honor. So I'm told I have 20 minutes, so I'm going to jump in. If you can see in the chat, hopefully this works, I've just shared a PDF. Can I get some nods that people are like able to open the PDF? Yeah. Some thumbs up. Coming through. Okay, great, amazing. So what I'm hoping that we can do in our short time together tonight is really three things. First, I want to explore the question of what exactly is the heroism, what I really see as heroic conduct that is displayed by Ruth, and then separately by Boaz as models for the kind of heroic action that is possible for vulnerable, marginalized people, and the different and also important kind of heroic conduct that is possible for powerful, privileged people. And think also a little bit about the kinds of cultural and legal barriers that they were up against, and conversely, the kinds of cultural and legal norms that actually made it possible for them to each be brave in the ways that they were. So I want to start with Ruth. And let's just jump in. Can someone actually volunteer to come off mute and read this first from Megillat Ruth? Anybody feeling brave?
Hey,
have
Sarah,
their voice
sure.
heard?
It's Sarah B. Help.
Amazing. So perfect. Nice to see you, Sarah. Before you read, I'll just say one thing, which is that if we really wanted to get the full picture of Ruth's heroism and her character development, we would really have to read the entire Book of Ruth. And it's actually only 4 chapters long. So in another time and space, I actually encourage you to read the entire Book of Ruth. But for now, I'm going to bring one short section that I think kind of is the essence of her heroism. And as Sarah is reading it, I want to ask everyone to just think and listen deeply and try and get a sense of what is she up against? What is Ruth facing? What are the risks for her? What are the risks she takes? And in the face of that, what different kinds of courage? I think there are a few different kinds of courage on display here. What different kinds of courage does she display and why? So those are the questions to be thinking about as Sarah reads this text. Sarah, hit it.
Where is it? Oh,
we're text 1 here.
Sorry, am I supposed to click on it?
Megillat Ruth 2:2.
No, am I supposed to click on it in the chat?
Yes, click on the link.
Okay.
Is there someone who has it open? And then I'll have you read the next one. Is there someone who has it open?
Yeah, sorry.
You can read this?
I got it. Ruth the
Okay,
Moabite,
amazing.
that one. Yeah. Ruth the Moabite
Yeah.
said to Naomi, I would like to go to the fields and glean among the ears of grain behind someone who may show me kindness. Yes, daughter, go, she replied, and off she went. She came and gleaned in a field behind the reapers, and as luck would have it, it was the piece of land belonging to Boaz, who was of Elimelech's family. Presently, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem. He greeted the reapers, the Lord be with you, and they responded, the Lord bless you. Boaz said to the servant who was in charge of the reapers, to whom does that girl belong? The servant in charge of the reapers said, she is a Moabite girl who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers. She has been on her feet ever since she came this morning. She has rested but little in the hut. Boaz said to Ruth, listen to me, daughter. Don't go to glean in another field. Don't go elsewhere, but stay here close to my girls. Keep your eyes in the field. They are reaping and follow them. I have ordered the men not to touch you.
Okay, great. So folks can just call it out or throw it in the chat. What do you see here? What kinds of courage is Ruth exercising in this moment? No wrong answers. Just throw out some theories. What kinds of acts of bravery do we see here?
I think it's really hard to launch into unknowns. Like if I'm new to a place, if I haven't been there before, it's so much easier when someone's willing to hold my hand and introduce me and say, here's where you find this, here's where you find that. But just to say, okay, I'm just going to go to a field and see what happens, takes a specific kind of fearlessness. But I should add, though, she was probably starving. And so if you're in poverty, it's not even an issue of shame. It's just out of desperation and urgency. You might feel this impulse that you have to go, even if it's uncomfortable.
Great. So that's so beautifully said. It's so nice to hear your voice, Shahavad, and all the people posting in the chat, right? That there's just the basic sense that like this is the question of survival. She's desperate, Naomi's desperate, and she is saving herself, she is saving her family. And in order to do so, she is confronting, I think a lot of people have said so beautifully, the whatever fears or vulnerability she may experience around being new to town, being totally paradigmatically other, being a stranger, not knowing anyone, she is going anyways. She is walking into this place of strangeness and vulnerability. A few people have written about, just trying to skim the comments in the chat here, the ways in which it's hard to rely on other people. Rachel wrote so beautifully, it's hard, it takes courage to rely on others and to ask for help when you need it, right? It takes courage to hope when actually everything has gone terribly for her up until this point in time, right? It's very scary to be putting yourself and throwing yourself on somebody else's mercy. Beautiful, keep them coming. I think another thing I see here is just the courage to be the innovator, right? Until this point in the story, Ruth is really responsive to Naomi. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you go, I will follow, right? And here, she's the one who formulates the plan. Like, here's the plan. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go to the field. Okay, great. Other things, people call it out. I can't follow all the chat points. So put them up if you said something and I missed it, or come off mute and tell me. Other forms of courage?
Yes.
Okay, accepting risk. Please, go ahead.
One second. I'll put on my video so you can see. It'll be better, I think. Oh yeah. So I never even noticed it before, but because this is her story, that it says about the man, don't worry,
Great.
the man,
Okay.
I'm not going to touch you, which like,
Perfect.
I wasn't thinking about, and there's a double jeopardy, like, oh, the other men could be after her, but also like, is that man interested in her and is going to take advantage of her? Like, don't let me take advantage of you instead of someone else, right? There's that risk too.
Great, beautifully said, right? So a lot of the things we said before would be applicable to any ger, to any immigrant, to any stranger who is poor and vulnerable and has to go gleaning in the fields, but there are also quite clearly special ways in which she is in danger as a woman. And whether or not she is aware of it, I kind of have to imagine that she is, but it's quite clear that that is immediately obvious to both Boaz, and if you look at the next text in your source sheet, to Ruth, right? When she comes home and says it went really well in Boaz's field, one of the first things Ruth says is, oh good, stay in that field, because if you go to other fields, you might get assaulted, right? Very explicitly, everybody else in her life knows that she is vulnerable because she is poor, she is vulnerable because she is a stranger, and she is more vulnerable because she is a woman, and that one of the things she is facing is the possibility of sexual violence. So obviously it takes a tremendous
Oh, sorry. So sorry. I was just going to say that's something that like really stuck with me as well, because I am a woman who's faced sexual violence. So in the way that I can bring Ruth into the present day and like what women deal with still is a lot of sexual violence, or the risk of sexual violence, even just if we're not doing things like begging for food, or in a terrible situation of poverty, but we can still find that in order to keep ourselves safe and maybe get a promotion or something like that, we still face that risk of if you slept with him or if you do him a favor, you might get further. And even if it's not in a biblical sense anymore, it's still something that women face.
I'm so glad you shared that. And I'll say for myself, as also someone who has experienced sexual violence, both personally and in my work as a rabbi, has worked with folks who've experienced sexual violence, I'm hyper aware of the ways in which, whether or not that violence happens, it is overshadowing her whole experience, right? The threat of the violence itself is undermining her ability to do this work that she needs to do for her family's survival. And yet she is a hero, a true hero, in that she steps up to the face of that fear and she goes to the field anyhow. And that in and of itself is a remarkable act. I want to notice one other thing that I think someone wrote. This is not where I'm going, but I just have to pull it out because it's such a beautiful comment. Also the courage as someone who's just experienced tremendous personal loss to throw off her grief and move forward with her life and move forward with her family is incredibly beautiful comment. The kind of courage that I see most central to Ruth's story is actually a particular kind of courage, which is the courage to demand that other people live up to their responsibilities. So if we notice in this text, she asks very nicely, please, would you let me glean in your field? And I see that as like a strategy, because in fact, she is in fact entitled to glean in the field, right? If you look quickly at text 3, which is just one of many texts in Tanakh that outline the details in the Hebrew Bible of the really advanced welfare state of ancient Israel, we see phrases that are repeated over and over throughout the Hebrew Bible, which is that the gleanings of the field actually belong to people who are poor, to people who are strangers, who are foreigners, and particularly to widows and orphans. So she's like all of those things, and this food actually belongs to her. Right, so she might phrase it as a request for strategic or cultural reasons, but I really see her here as the kind of hero who can step forward and demand that other people live up to their responsibilities. Now, of course, it is easier to demand your rights when they have already been legally articulated for you, right? It is easier for her to do that work because she's stepping into a culture that has very strong legal norms saying that this food belongs to her. But it is still an incredibly courageous act to stand up and demand those rights. And I think all of us can think of examples of lots of times where in theory we are entitled to some kind of right, but it is not always so easy to stand up and demand it. And so I really see Ruth as a paradigmatic example of standing up and holding other people accountable to what really is hers in the first place. So let's pause there with Ruth and see the flip side of the story, right? Because if those are the kinds of heroic, courageous actions that we see from our characters of vulnerability, Boaz is the flip side of the story, right? He is the consummate insider. He is wealthy. He is a man. He is a landowner. He is like an important guy in the community. He has all the power and privilege. And so when I first started to read this text, I almost felt that heroic is kind of like too much to apply to him, right? It's not hard to share your food when you have lots of food, right? Mostly what he is very kind, which let's not underestimate that. Being kind is incredibly important. But I think there are some moments in the story where he crosses from just being kind and generous as people can be when they are secure and when they have plenty, not always, but hopefully, into moments of like real bravery and really putting that power and privilege on the line. So I think the first one is maybe a little subtle, but I want to just notice it before we move on to my main point with Boaz, which is that he doesn't just give her what she's entitled to, and he doesn't just give her tzedakah. But if we see here in text 4, Boaz actually orders his workers to intentionally create more forgotten sheaves than they really forget, which might be like forbidden, actually. He goes out of his way to favor her. And we see here in some early rabbinic writings, we see in text 5 here, Mishnah Peah, that actually this is something that the rabbis discourage, right? The text says, if you don't let the poor glean, or you let one poor person glean and not another poor person, or you help one of the poor more than the other poor, it's like almost a form of theft, right? You're stealing from some poor to give to the other poor. So we don't have time here to open up the like really complex legal and ethical question of whether or not Boaz was right to favor Ruth. But I think it's just important to notice that there were other poor people in the field who may very well have noticed that Ruth was getting extra support and may very well have been angry about it, right? So it could be, I could imagine that Boaz is spending a certain amount of social capital among other Israelites by choosing to single out and favor a non-Israelite poor person over a horde of Israelite poor, right? This could be something that would cause tension in his community, and he's willing to sort of take that risk because he thinks there's something about Ruth that is so much in need of response. But it may be that his community is not going to love this about him, right? This is not something that's going to earn him popularity. But I think the moment where he really crosses into this realm of courage and heroic conduct and putting himself on the line is here in text 6, the beginning of chapter 4. And let's read it. Can somebody read text 6? Come off mute and read text 6 for us. I will call on someone randomly if nobody volunteers. I will voluntold someone I don't even know, just for extra fun.
I can
do it.
Boaz said to the next of kin, Naomi, now returned from the country of Moab, must sell the piece of land which belonged to our kinsman Elimelech. I thought I should disclose the matter to you and say, acquire it in the presence of those seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you are willing to redeem it, redeem. But if you will not redeem, tell me that I may know. For there is no one to redeem but you, and I come after you. I am willing to redeem it, he replied. Boaz continued, when you acquire the property from Naomi and from Ruth the Moabite, you must also acquire the wife of the deceased, so as to perpetuate the name of the deceased among his estate. The Redeemer replied, then I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own estate. You take over my right of redemption, for I am unable to exercise it. And Boaz said to the elders and to the rest of the people, You are witnesses today that I am acquiring from Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilon and Machlon. I am also acquiring Ruth the Moabite, the wife of Machlon, as my wife, so as to perpetuate the name of the deceased upon his estate, that the name of the deceased may not disappear from among his kinsmen and from the gate of his hometown. You are witnesses today.
Okay, amazing. So we really don't have enough time to break apart this amazing and fascinating text. Very, Cliff Notes version here. Boaz is choosing to marry Ruth, in so doing, taking on the sort of land of her family, of her husband and of Naomi's husband. And also he's marrying her through this particular mechanism that means that if they have a child, that child will sort of be the heir of her deceased husband and not of himself.
Without
and
even
you can see a
asking
few
her,
things.
right? He's just
Yeah,
like, I'm
right.
just gonna marry this woman. Like, what?
Totally. Well, we skipped chapter 3, where she seems to sort of proposition him and sort of intentionally move the process in this direction. So I think there is more indication than in most biblical texts vis-a-vis women that she wants this marriage to take place. But you are right that one of the things that is disconcerting for me about Sefer Ruth is that you start with a story about two women who are sort of full actors with voices and stories, and you end with this like remarkably patriarchal transaction in which Ruth and a piece of land are purchased together. So like, yes, that is troubling. And she seems to want this. She seems to set this in motion using her sexuality, which for many marginalized women is the only tool in their toolkit. And she uses it strategically and brilliantly, and that's complicated and deserving of its own conversation. But the points I want to make here just quickly are that this is really the moment where Boaz puts himself on the line. So first of all, financially, right? It is cheap for him to give a few omers of barley, a few, packages of food to a poor person. That's not touching him. Here he's making like a real capital investment. And part of what we can see that is that the other guy who has a right before him doesn't want to touch this. It is not financially advantageous to bring in a wife and future potential children who are not going to actually be your heirs. This is expensive, and he is willing to do it anyways. Maybe because he loves her, maybe because it's the right thing to do, right? We could unpack all of that, but this is like a serious financial commitment. The bigger piece is that there's like a real social capital issue here. So just quickly to look at text 7, we'll remind ourselves that it is actually, according to the Torah, forbidden to marry a Moabite specifically. Now, the rabbinic back and forth about whether or not Boaz has done something against the law is like a topic for another day, but that is reflective of the fact that there is a deep-seated bias, you may even call it a racism, in ancient Israelite society against Moabites specifically. And he is not bowing to that social pressure, and he is saying, this person is deserving of being the wife of a leader in our community. Look at who she is. Look at the character she's displayed. Look at the heroism she's displayed. I am going to buck that sort of cultural and social trend. All of that deserves a lot more discussion, but I told Aliza that I would keep to 20 minutes. So I will just say in my last couple of allotted minutes that this is all very rich, and there's a lot of pieces here that I think connect back to my broader work and thinking around Torah and sexual violence. And I just want to highlight a few things that are sort of my takeaways for now from these texts, right? The first one is maybe simple, but I think simple, maybe to me at least, in a powerful and worth saying kind of way, which is that there are simply different kinds of courage required from vulnerable and powerful people. And the kind of courage that Ruth showed is really, for me, kind of an example and an inspiration of the kind of courage that is required for those of us who are victims of sexual violence to come forward and to share those stories as a gift to our community and in the hope of it being better. And in particular, the model that she gives us of what it looks like to say, I am going to hold you accountable to the values you have articulated for yourself. You have told me I have these rights, and now I want you to make good on them. That is a real powerful and particular model that is to me a real inspiration in that work of, you say that you want this to be a safe space. Okay, here's what I need you to do to make that really happen. On the flip side, for me, Boaz is really an inspiration of what it looks like for someone who is in a place of power to not just like give a little charity on the edge, not just like have an event once a year, right? Not just do a little nice thing, but really to do something that shifts his community drastically, which is the sort of takeaway point of Megillat Ruth, and to do it despite or maybe because of the fact that it costs him quite a bit in terms of money, in terms of social capital, in the same way that those of us who are leaders in Jewish communities, when folks come to us and disclose stories that show that there is rot at the heart of our communities, are going to have to listen to those stories in ways that create action, that costs money, that costs social capital, that creates upheaval. And Boaz faced all of those things, and for me is an inspiration for us to do the same. And I'll just say, I think we can talk a lot more about this later, but the cultural and legal norms in this story are sometimes real barriers to justice and to Ruth and Boaz being able to come forward as heroes. But there are other places, in particular, the fact that ancient Israel already had this really robust structure of welfare state that make it so much easier for them to come forward and to be the heroes that they are, right? As I said at the beginning, it's just a lot easier to demand justice in a system where those rights are already articulated, where people have already been talking about their values, where that is already a part of the public discourse. And so that obviously also makes me think a lot about what are the ways that we as Jewish communities and leaders of Jewish communities need to lay the groundwork so that the cultural norms are already in place, so that the conversation is already happening, so that the laws are already well aligned, so that when someone does come forward, we are ready to give them a table to stand on so that they can do their work and their courage and their heroism from a place of having the cultural and legal norms work for them and not against them. So much more to say about all of that, but I will pause there and turn it over to our next teachers.
Wow, Sarah, thank you so much. There's so much to think about. And as you were talking at the end, I was wondering, I wonder what happens next, you know, like the next woman who comes into that society after Boaz has done that amazing act of heroism. You know, is Boaz a one-off, or does he spark, you know, some kind of new ways of thinking and responding? So thank you so much. Our next teacher is Avigayil Halperin. She is a teacher and writer whose work focuses on feminist and queer Torah, most recently through her newsletter project called Approaching. Avigayil is going to be ordained as a rabbi by Hadar in, I think you said 33 days, perhaps, or something. Okay. And what she loves about Shavuot is that we not only get to learn Torah, but we get to do Torah about Torah. You can see the rest of Avigayil's bio in the chat. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. This is really such a treat. Oh, okay, I need to adjust my Zoom so I'm not looking only at my own face, because that is terrible. Okay, now I can see everyone's faces. So I just want to start by, can we not screen share just yet? Sorry. Thank you. Okay. So I just want to start, we're about a little more than halfway through our time together. Just notice your body. We learn Torah with our bodies and not just our minds. Do one thing to adjust yourself to get a little more comfortable. I've been sitting with my shoulders hunched forward. I'm going to loosen up a little bit. Okay. So I want a second start after the first start by inviting you to think about one thing about your own family that is not normal. And whatever comes to mind, it might be really obvious, it might not be obvious. And I'm using not normal intentionally. This might be something that you think of as not normal, that you think of, wow, I've internalized stigma about that, and I don't like that. It might be something you think of as not normal, and you think, yes, that's something that brings me a lot of joy. That's something I'm really proud of. Any one thing about your family that is not normal. And you can think that to yourself. If you feel comfortable sharing an example in the chat, you're warmly invited to do so. So just take a minute, I'm going to invite you to think of one example to share. Everybody's different, but think of one concrete example. Okay, we have no speaking. Tragic loss, being descendants of survivors, women who didn't feel the need to marry. Yeah, song parodies. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of richness and a lot of pain. And especially around loss, communication, and lack thereof, but also independence and joy. And there are lots of ways that things that we think of as unique about our families are things that we think of as not part of the normal family package, right? If you subscribe to the family, whatever, and you get your 2.5 kids, husband, wife, white picket fence, most families are not like that. And so in thinking about that, and that we all have parts of our family experience, part of our family systems that are not what we would think of as normal or that society would tell us are normal, I want us to look at our first source together. I'm going to share the source sheet in the chat, as well as we're going to screen share, but I invite you to do the situation where you scooch the bar over so you can still see everyone's faces as well. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that's okay. I'm not going to invite you to learn a new tech skill now, but if you prefer, you can also click on it in the chat. Okay. So we're going to primarily be looking at chunks from Megillat Ruth with 2 other pieces. We're going to start off by looking at a text from an essay called Queer and Now by Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick. Eve Sedgwick was one of the major queer theorists of the 80s and 90s. If you've heard of Judith Butler, she's in the lineage of Judith Butler. If you haven't heard of Judith Butler, she remains in the lineage of Judith Butler, but that's not going to be helpful to orienting you. And she passed away in 2009, and I think those are all the things you need to know about her for now. And I'm going to invite someone to read this text aloud. I want to flag, this is a kind of dense academic sounding text. You do not need to understand every word or phrase in order to understand the main point. There is one takeaway that I'm going to make sure we get after we've looked at this text. So I would love a volunteer to read, get what you can out of it, and we're going to do a read.
I volunteer.
Please go ahead.
This is Sharon Baumgold. How far do you want me to read?
Read through the whole thing.
Okay, I don't think I can see the whole thing right now, but from Queer and Now by Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick.
Yes, it's 3 paragraphs. 3 paragraphs.
What if the richest junctures weren't the only ones where everything means the same thing? Think of that entity, the family, an impacted social space in which all of the following are meant to line up perfectly with each other. A surname, a sexual dyad, a legal unit based on state-regulated marriage, a circuit of blood relationships, a system of companionship and succor, a building, a proscenium between public and private, an economic unit of earning and taxation, the prime site of economic consumption, the prime site of cultural consumption, a mechanism to produce, care for, and acculturate children, a mechanism for accumulating material goods over several generations, a daily routine, a unit in a community of worship, a site of patriotic formation, and of course, the list could go on. I see it's been a ruling intuition to me that the most productive strategy, intellectually, emotionally, might be whenever possible to disarticulate them one from another, to disengage them, the bonds of blood, of law, of habitation, of privacy, of companionship, and succor from the lockstep of their unanimity in the system called family.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Okay, if you heard that or read that and feel anywhere between 50 and 100% confident that you got the main idea, I would love for you to share it either out loud in the chat. What is Sedgwick saying? And remember, 50 to 100% confidence.
Our paradigms don't work.
Great. Say one more sentence about that.
That we set up this idea of how people should live, and it just doesn't work.
Great. Yeah, that not all of the pieces fit together. Kate in the chat, family can mean more than we think it does.
It's a very heavy load. It's like loading a lot of baggage onto a cart, and that cart may or may not be as solid as to hold all of that. You
Yes.
know, some people say, you know, you should have a French marriage where you don't expect romance from your economic partner. I mean, that's just sort of one.
Yeah, thank you. Right, that I love this metaphor of the cart is too heavy, right? That the idea, what Kosofsky is saying, right, we have this idea of family, and family is a term we use to understand and describe a million different kinds of relationships that we kind of squish into one bucket, right? Where you live, how we consume culture, how we show up in religious community, romantic relationship, reproduction, all of those things, Cedric is saying, don't necessarily go together, but we put those all in the family bucket and then expect families to be all of that. And she's saying, so that's her descriptive claim. And then her prescriptive claim, where she's saying, here's what you should do, is she's saying, we should disentangle those and our lives would be fuller and richer if we saw family in a more expansive way and didn't expect the thing we call family to contain everything all at once. So with that hat on, with that lens, I want us to look at some texts from Megillat Ruth. And I think I successfully actually brought primarily texts that do not overlap with the sections Sarah brought, which I feel very proud of because it's a very short sefer. So we're gonna have seen even more of the text. So if we could share the screen again, or go back to where you were looking at, if you were looking at it in a separate window, I would love someone to read for us in English. This is perhaps the most famous part of Megillat Ruth. I took the juicy part. Great. I've just been informed that Rabbi Sarah Mulhern checked my source sheet in advance. So it was not a coincidence, actually. It's that she is a generous co-educator. All right. So I would love someone to go ahead and read from our second source, which is...
It's not on the screen.
It's not on the screen, but if you click on it, if you click on the link in the chat, you can open it up. And it's Megillat Ruth 1:16 to 7. Well, it's not 16 to 17. I cited that wrong, but it is from the first parak of Ruth.
Yeah, there's nowhere to click. Okay.
I can read if you want.
Thank you.
Okay. But Naomi replied, "Turn back, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I any more sons in my body who might be husbands for you? Turn back, my daughters, for I am too old to be married. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I was married tonight and I also bore sons, should you wait for them to grow up? Should you on their account debar yourselves from marriage? Oh no, my daughters, my lot is far more bitter than yours, for the hand of the Lord has struck out against me." They broke into weeping again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law farewell, but Ruth clung to her. So she said, "See, your sister-in-law has returned to her people and her gods. Go follow your sister-in-law." But Ruth replied, "Do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus and more may the Lord do to me, if anything but death parts me from you."
Oh, chills. Okay, thank you, Kate. Okay. So this is a really well-known piece of text. And I want to say part of my reading of this comes from the queer feminist tradition of reading this as a kind of romantic declaration. From observant Jewish lesbian couples like to use this quote, where you go, I go, etc., on, ketubot and wedding dentures. You don't have to be convinced that this is romantic to think that this is building a kind of family, which is what I want to convince you of. What I think is going on here, or a way to read what is going on here, is that basically Ruth is saying, Naomi, I still want to be a part of your family. I was married to your son. I joined your family. I want to remain in your family. We are a family. It is not just that marriage between myself and your son. We have a familial bond. And Naomi says, we can't be a family because you can't have more children with me. That we can't be a family without reproductivity, without producing more children. And Ruth says, no, we still can have all kinds of important shared bonds. A family does not require all of these pieces. We are going to be in this together. And Naomi seems to accept that. But they return to Israel. And the stakes get really high. They are starving. And I think that it becomes clear then that this kind of what I'm going to call queer family is not working in their societal structures. They do not have a breadwinner. They can have this really rich, nuanced, literally till death do us part commitment to each other and commitment to building something together, and it does not get them food. They can't live. And they come up against this wall of they're trying to build this relationship, whatever kind of relationship it may be, but that is not working. And so Naomi says to Ruth, we're gonna have to reconsider this. And I would love a reader for the second section from Ruth. And I can't see everyone at once, so feel free to just yell or unmute.
I can read.
Thank you.
So she said?
Nope, from Naomi, her mother-in-law.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
You're good.
Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "Daughter, I must seek a home for you where you will be happy. Now there's our kinsman Boaz, whose girls you were close to. He will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor tonight." And Naomi said, "Stay here, daughter, till you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today."
Thank you. Okay. So Naomi says, go out, find a husband, step into this respectable, socially legible, easy to understand family structure so that we can literally have food. That's what you need to do. And Ruth does. Okay. We're going to read a little excerpt now from this really wonderful article, which is hyperlinked, so you can click on it and read the whole thing later on, by Rabbi Becky Silverstein. Rabbi Becky is, among other things, he's the leader, one of the leaders of the Trans Halacha Project through SVIVAH, doing really amazing work on queer and trans Torah in the world. And when I was preparing this session, I kind of Googled Ruth Naomi queer family. And I was like, oh no, someone's already written about this. And I was like, Baruch shekivanti, thank God someone else has already written about this. And so we're going to read this little excerpt. The bolding and italics are mine. I put that there. And I would love someone to read that for us.
I'm happy to read.
Thank you very much.
Can you remind us where it is? Which?
Yes, it is in the middle of the second page.
Okay, thank you.
From
Is it
Ruth's
the one
Radical
from
Family.
Ruth's Radical Family?
Exactly.
Aviva Zornberg understands Boaz's decision to marry Ruth as an act of chesed, loving kindness. In so doing, he gives her societal status, financial means, and a chance to produce children on behalf of her deceased husband. In my view, Boaz is not merely acting out of obligation, but from an intentional extension of love and care towards Ruth and Naomi. Boaz is choosing to build a family with them.
Thank you.
Aww.
Yeah. Aw. Yeah. And so the claim here is that Boaz is actively making a choice to opt into a family relationship with Ruth and Naomi. That this is not just a relationship of duty, but that Boaz is actually choosing a kind of family. Then the question becomes, what kind of family is Boaz choosing? I think there are two paths here, right? There is a path where Boaz says, society says, all of the obvious structures say, okay, we're going to form a brand new family where just as Ruth left her whatever initial family we never even met, married Naomi's son and is now in Naomi's family, Ruth is going to marry Boaz, abandon Naomi, and become absorbed into Boaz's family in this sort of standard, what we might imagine as the caricatured ancient Near East sexist marriage structure. Or there's another option. And I think the other option is what happens. And which is extremely, extremely, I think, exciting and beautiful. And we're going to see that other option in a piece from the last parak, the last chapter, that someone should read for us. I'll volunteer someone.
I can read.
Oh, amazing. Thank you.
So Boaz married Ruth. She became his wife, and he cohabited with her. The Lord let her conceive, and she bore a son. And the woman said to Naomi, Blessed be the Lord, who has not withheld a redeemer from you today. May his name be perpetuated in Israel. He will renew your life and sustain your old age, for he is born of your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons. Naomi took the child and held it to her bosom. She became its foster mother. And the women neighbors gave him a name, saying, A son is born to Naomi. They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, father of David.
Thank you so much. Okay, so even if we put this in the framework of whatever kind of proto-chalitza levirate marriage situation is going on here, where the children aren't really Boaz's in the lineage, there's still no world in which legally or culturally they're Naomi's children, if we by the book. But not only their immediate family, but also the entire community recognizes this child as born not to this Boaz Ruth dyad, but to Naomi as part of that relationship. And so I think what's happening is we see this other path that Boaz, as the one with the power in some ways, is the one who is making choices, even if they're behind the scenes, that Boaz does not absorb Ruth into his family and kind of erase Naomi. Boaz joins Ruth and Naomi's existing family. And rather than saying, in order to survive, you are going to have to step in to our pre-built family framework, Boaz says, let's build something new. We're going to imagine a new way of being in relationship with each other. And I think a particular point where this comes out is, I think, a good proof text for what I'm saying is a piece from a little earlier that I've put at the end here, because we don't have to read the Torah in order. And I'm going to read this because I'm keeping an eye on the time. So this is when Ruth is in the field and she is interacting with Boaz. She prostrated herself with her face to the ground and said to him, "Why are you so kind as to single me out when I am a foreigner?" Boaz said in reply, "I have been told of all you did for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and the land of your birth and came to a people you had not known before." So in the sort of traditional reading of this is Boaz saying to Ruth, I noticed you because you are so kind, you are so giving, you are so generous to your mother-in-law. But I think there's another way to read this, which is that Boaz is saying, I see the relationship you have with Naomi, I see what you've built, and I admire that, and I want in. And that the reason that the book can end with Naomi not being shunted to the side, and with this kind of new, different family that's being built, is because Boaz sees Ruth and Naomi and does not say, that's just 2 women, or okay, like they're doing a nice thing hanging out on their own, but obviously they're gonna all move into my house and there's an in-law suite and I can imagine exactly what it's going to look like. Boaz looks at Ruth and Naomi's relationship and says, this is something holy, this is something important, this is a connection you've already built, and I see that, and I am not here to interfere with it, I am here to join it. And I think that's a really important lens for when we think about queer relationships, queer families, but also other kinds of vulnerability and marginalization. I don't want to, just mention sexual violence and then move on, but that is also what I'm doing. But I'm noting that all kinds of experiences on the margins, we can say, okay, that's nice while it lasts, but then let's step back into our standard frames and our expectations. Or we can say, that is beautiful Torah that is there. How are we going to receive this Torah and bring it into our communities and our lives? And I think the message of Megillat Ruth then is that when we do that, we end up with Oved and Yishai and David and God willing, any minute now, Mashiach. Metaphorically or literally, whatever works for you. And I think that's one of the powerful ways that we can think about receiving Torah on Shavuot, is receiving not just the big booming mountain cloud lightning Torah, but receiving the Torah from the people who are all around the edges of the camp and saying, how are we going to integrate that Torah into Torah and our communities? All right. Chag Sameach.
Thank you so much, Avigayil. And I love what you said, and I love especially the way that you ended. The idea that we need to listen to the people at the edges around the mountain and not just the people on top of the mountain. Such an important idea. And Sarah talked about the ways that one of the ways that we can do that as a society is by having laws kind of integrated within our society so that we don't have to kind of always have those people who are extraordinary, who step up and do these amazing things. Sometimes it's the law that protects us. Sometimes it's the rules that protect us. And just 1 minute. Yep. And so sometimes it's true. Sometimes the law really does protect us. But I think it's important to note as well that sometimes the law is really the thing that holds us back, right? The laws and the rules create boundaries where people can hide behind those rules and they can say, I don't need to listen. I don't need to respond to you. I don't need to really make a good faith effort to hear you because I've got these laws and so I don't have to do it. And just, I was thinking about this before, examples in my own life where I've said something where I've asked people to make accommodations or to listen, and they hide behind the law, right? In all kinds of ways in which it's totally infuriating. So if you want to hold up your hand and tell me if you've experienced that too, you don't have to tell me, just raise your hand if you've had an experience like that as well. Okay, I would say that if we think about it, we've probably all had experiences like that where law is used as a shield, right? When people don't really want to hear you or don't really want to pay attention to the very valid claims that you have. And so I think that while the Book of Ruth is a beautiful example of the way that law, as Rabbi Sarah said, really does help us, I think that we can also think about the ways in which people say, I don't need to listen, right, because of the rules or because of the laws. And actually, there's a really beautiful piece of Talmud in Yevamot, in Tractate Yevamot, that talks about this in the context of Ruth and Boaz. But the funny thing is, it doesn't talk about Ruth and it doesn't talk about Boaz. It talks about King David. Okay, so David, as Avigayil just ended with, is Ruth's great grandson. And our story opens when David is on the cusp of glory, when he defeats Goliath and he comes to kind of like national fame. So Willow, would you mind sharing the screen so that we can look at it, please?
Yes, just give me 1 second.
Thank you. Okay, I'll start us off. The Mishnah in Yevamot talks about the fact that a Moabite man is not allowed to enter into the congregation of God. In other words, he's not allowed to marry a Jew. But a Moabite woman is allowed to marry a Jew. Okay, and we know that Ruth was a Moabite woman. And so that's why she's allowed to marry Boaz, and that's why she has children. And her children, her great-grandson ends up being King David. And eventually, as Avigayil said, her descendant will be the Messiah. Okay, I can also try to share and see what happens if that's better. Oh, here we go. Thank you. Okay, here we go. All right, so I have for you over here a Rembrandt, or at least that's what Google told me it was. I can't vouch for it myself. But you've got here a Rembrandt, and you see the person in yellow, that is supposed to be King Saul. And then you see David on his knees holding the head of Goliath and presenting it to King Saul. Right? So sometimes when we think about the battle between David and Goliath, we think about it mostly about it being between those two people. But there's really a very important third person in the story as well, and that's King Saul, right? King Saul was looking for somebody to defeat Goliath and protect the honor of Israel. But King Saul, when he sees that David has defeated Goliath and he sees all the people kind of swooning over David, he gets really scared because he's afraid that David is going to usurp him. So the Talmud tells us about this conversation that Saul has with his advisors when he sees that David has killed Goliath. Okay, so this is all right, Midrash Agadah. This is all kind of narrative, and the rabbis kind of imagining what the conversation is. But let's look at it together and see how it goes. So Willa, if you could just go down a little bit, please. Let's get to scene 1 on the battlefield. Great, keep going. Okay, great, thank you. All right, so and I have to say, I learned about scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, scene 4 from Sarah Mulhern's husband, my chavruta. So thanks, Will. Okay, scene 1 on the battlefield. Okay, so the Gemara asks, how do we know that female Ammonites and Moabites are permitted immediately to marry a Jew? Rabbi Yochanan said, as the verse states, and when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, as your soul lives, O king, I cannot tell. But did Saul really not recognize David? But don't we know, isn't it previously written that David came to Saul and Saul loved him greatly and he became his armor bearer? Right? So why is it that Saul asks who this person is? Whose son is this who came here? Rather, it must be that he was asking about David's father. Okay, so he knew David, but he wanted to know who David's father was. But wait a second, isn't it written with regard to Jesse, David's father, and the man in the days of Saul was old and came among men? And Rav, and some say Rabbi Abba said, this is referring to Jesse, father of David, who always entered with multitudes and left with multitudes. Okay, apparently David's father Yishai had an entourage. Wherever he would go, lots of people would be with him. Everybody knew Yishai. So what was it that Saul was really asking about David? Rather, this is what Saul was saying. Does he come from the descendants of Peretz, or does he come from the descendants of Zerach? Okay, Judah has 2 sons with Tamar. One of them is Peretz, and one of them is Zerach. What is the significance of this question? If he comes from Peretz, he will be king. As a king may breach Poretz away for himself, and no one can stop him. And if he comes from Zerach, he will be merely a man of importance, but not a king. Okay, in other words, he's saying, I need to know what kind of person is David, right? He just did this amazing act of bravery that nobody else was able to do. But was that just a one-time thing, or was it part of a way of being, of breaching, of breaching walls, of going through boundaries that's characteristic of what a king does? Okay, so let's keep going. Willa, a little bit further down, please. Okay, and basically at this point the Gemara is saying, why did Saul ask all these questions? Because he was afraid. He thought that maybe David was going to try to take the kingship away from him. So he wanted to know, is he a descendant of Peretz or of Zerach? Is he a breaker of boundaries? Does he have this characteristic or not? Okay, turns out that David actually is a descendant of Peretz. Okay, so at this point, Saul is feeling insecure. He's king, right? And yet he's feeling insecure by this teenager, right? Who he's somehow perceiving as a threat, right? So David is the threat, Saul is the person in position of power, and he's trying to figure out how threatened he should be from this kid. Okay, so now let's go on to scene 2. Enter Doeg. Okay, so Doeg, if you've learned the book of Samuel, is really not a very nice guy. He is King Saul's, yes, thank you, Wendy, he is. He is a descendant, Doeg the Edomite is Saul's chief herdsman, and he is an advisor to King Saul. In the Talmud, we're told that Doeg is actually also a great Torah scholar. Like, he could run laps around all the other Torah scholars. He knew Torah backwards and forwards. But we also know that Doeg is really not a nice guy. We know that later on, he is going to slaughter a whole town of priests in order to, with this kind of like made up story, to kind of protect Saul against David. Where really, he goes and he slaughters a whole town of innocent people. So now we've got Doeg, who's Mr. Law without heart, right? Mr. Law without values. And he's somebody who's going to want to try to take law and use it to keep David away and to keep Moabites away, right? Moabite women away, and to not include. Okay, so Doeg says, before you inquire as to whether or not he's fit for kingship, inquire as to whether or not he's even fit to enter into the congregation. He descends from Ruth the Moabite, right? And Moabites are not allowed to enter the congregation. But Abner said to him, no, Doeg, you must have forgotten. We learned in yeshiva, right, that a Moabite woman is allowed to enter the congregation. And Doeg says, no, I don't think that's true. And Doeg goes through all these arguments about why it is that actually a Moabite woman should not be allowed to enter. And his arguments are so good that nobody is able to respond to him. They don't know what to do. So what do you do if you've got a Jewish legal argument and you can't answer it yourself? Who do you go to? Right? You go to one of the many rabbis on this call, or soon to be rabbis on this call, right? You go to the yeshiva, you go to the house of study, you go to the Beit Midrash, and you ask there. Okay, let's go to scene 3. So Willa, let's keep going down. Okay, thank you. All right, so we're in scene 3. So they say, like Doeg is making all these amazing arguments about why Ruth should not have been allowed to be part of the congregation, which means that David, forget about being king, he can't even be a Jew, right? So they go to the Beit Midrash, the house of study. Saul says, the halacha, the law, is hidden from you. Go and inquire about the matter in the study hall. He went to the study hall and asked. They said to him, no, the law is an Ammonite man is forbidden, but not an Ammonite woman. A Moabite man is forbidden, but not a Moabite woman. Okay, let's keep going, Willa. Just keep going down a little bit more. Thank you. Doeg raised before them all those objections, right? Doeg answered, they said, no, but we know this law, and he refuted the law. And they kept trying to explain why the law was true, and he kept refuting until they were silent. They had no arguments left. Doeg, the man of law, it seems, had won, okay? And Doeg then wanted to proclaim that David was disqualified from entering into the congregation. Okay, Willa, now let's go back into the main room. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so there we've got it, right? We've got this, we've got this story where Doeg is using law to exclude Ruth, to exclude David, right? To keep them out. So I guess my question for you, and you could put this in the chat, is what would you do? Like, what happens next? Right? There's this person, he's using the law. He's not allowing Ruth in. He's not allowing David in. He's so scared about what might happen to his boss, King Saul, if David is let in, that he's hiding behind the law, and he's using the law really well because he's good at that. That's what he does, right? He's using, and he's in a position of power, right? The law is written for people like him. So what do you do in that case where the people on the inside can hide behind the law? What could happen next in this story? If you want to write in the chat, I'd love to see what you have to say. Not an easy question. Right. Chances are, I don't think anyone's going to write in the chat what actually happens in the Gemara, right? But what happens when they've got the rule of law behind them, or the way that they interpret the law, right? And you come in and you have a disclosure, you have a claim, you have a complaint, right? You want to be heard, but they don't want to hear you and they hide behind the law. Okay, so thank you, Tony. So one idea is like, wait it out, right? Kind of wait till there's some sort of shift in power and then try again. Yeah, so, and Candy is saying control and exclusion. That's exactly what's happening here, right? And we're using the law as a method of control and exclusion. Okay, so what happens? Let's see. Okay, right. So maybe you could just change the law, right? And I think actually that's kind of the closest to what actually happens in the Talmud. And then this question of, is there a Jewish concept of disregarding an immoral law, right? What role should values play in law, right? And if you see a law that is immoral, can you say, well, we're just not going to listen to it? All right, Marilyn's saying, right, you may want to just say this is immoral, but you have to talk to people on their own plane, right? And beat them at their own game, like the children of Tzlov, and hope that God will come to your defense, right? And Liz is saying this would be a good use for lo b'shamayim, of saying it's not all from heaven, but we get a chance to decide what it's going to be, right? You can choose to leave your community. When you choose to leave the community, that's a huge loss for yourself. But definitely you can choose to leave. You can get different people in power, right? Elect different people, find some other people in power to interpret the law differently. Yeah. Oh, and Elena, yeah, I want to hear more about that at some point, right? I can't be the only one to think Ruth got the short end of the stick. Yeah, allyship. Yeah. Step up, right? And be an ally so that it's not just one person, right, who's standing up. These are all beautiful, thank you. These are all such beautiful ways of responding. I want to show you what happens in the Gemara. So Willa, if you could share the screen, please.
The same document.
Yeah, the same document, thank you. Okay, thank you. All right, and we're in scene 4, thank you. Okay, so let's see what happens. All right, so remember, Doeg wants to say that Ruth cannot be part of the community and David cannot be part of the community. So what happens? Now, Amasa was the son of a man whose name was Yitra the Israelite that went into Avigayil, the daughter of Nachash. Okay, so Amasa is a warrior. Okay, later on he becomes David's chief of staff, right? And And later he's called Yeter the Ishmaelite. So is he Yitra the Israelite, or is he Yeter the Ishmaelite? So Rava said, okay, this is what happened. Nobody put this in the chat. This teaches that he girded his sword like Ishmael and said, whoever does not accept this halacha and act accordingly shall be stabbed with a sword. This is the tradition that I received from the court of Samuel from Ramah. An Ammonite man is prohibited from entering into the congregation, but not an Ammonite woman. A Moabite man is prohibited from entering into the congregation, but not a Moabite woman. Okay, so what happens at the end of this story is that Amasa gets up, probably a big guy, he's a warrior with his sword, and he kind of tries to pierce through the law, right? He says whoever doesn't accept the halacha that David is included and Ruth is included is going to be stabbed with the sword. Oh, and not only that, but I actually have a received tradition that this is the case. And we all know that in the Talmud, a received tradition is even stronger than a sword, right? Okay, thanks, Willa. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to not talk too much about this, but I want to say that I find this piece of Talmud to be really interesting. Right? It wasn't like Amasa got up and said, let's all talk it out together. Let's figure out something together, right? He takes the sword, and our story starts with the sword, right? The sword of Goliath, which is not effective, right? Against David and his stones. And it ends with a sword. And it also starts with a story about David who breaches boundaries. And then it talks about Doeg, who's somebody who tries to maintain boundaries. David is somebody who brings redemption through breaching boundaries. And Doeg is somebody who wants to maintain the status quo against redemption, right, by keeping up boundaries. And what I see Amasa doing is kind of symbolically breaching that boundary. And I think one thing that the Talmud is trying to tell us is that sometimes you really need to breach boundaries in order to get the right result and to get something done, right? That sometimes we think, oh, but there are laws, there are boundaries, there's nothing I can do about it, right? But it's the characteristic of a king to be able to say, this is when the law works and this is when the law doesn't work, right? This is when the law protects people and this is when the law harms people. And not to hide behind, what is and what the status quo is. And the other thing is, right, that Doeg is a person who is law, but he's not values. He's law bereft of values. And when you have law bereft of values, that's almost like the most dangerous thing that you could have, right? And part of what we need to do in our work, somebody talked about allyship, right, is to make sure that law is hand in hand with values, right? And that's part of what we're doing here tonight, right? But that's part of what we need to do as a community, is to make sure that our laws actually do reflect our values. So lots more to say, but I'm going to stop here. And I'm going to invite Dr. Hadar Schwartz, who introduced herself at their very beginning, to kind of respond to some of the themes that came up tonight.
Thank you so much. So I don't know how I can top the beautiful presenters and what we all heard, but a few things that come to mind for me as I was listening, thinking about the courage of our leaders, biblical leaders, and maybe places where we wish things look different in the present, ways we can choose to help each other have legitimacy, be treated with respect, offered support, ways we can use our power together to amplify voices in places where we are aware that we don't have enough, need more, need to change the institutions themselves. We talked about many different feelings and experiences, feelings of threat, of hurt, terror, being violated. For Ruth, we talked about it, for people sharing it in their own lives. We talked of love, companionship, and family. Again, for Ruth, and also thinking about that in our own lives, and just recognizing that conversations like this can bring memories, experiences, sadnesses to the surface. So, for all of us to think after about what came up in our minds and our bodies, and to be aware of that, and recognize the different things that you may need, and being kind to yourself and to others, and generous after bringing these things up and thinking about them. And I think a theme that came up in being together in this community, it's definitely thinking about Ruth and Naomi, and that comes up always when I think about talking about hard topics, is the value of other people, in that that people, relationships can help us talk about and deal with really difficult things and make space for complexity and painful experiences. And in being invited into this beautiful community, I can really hear how each person sharing and bringing these incredible voices together will, and kind of using this community will also make it more possible to talk about difficult things, not only today, but in this future conversation that was already sort of alluded to. So I'm hopeful that in June, when we're able to come back together, we can make space to think about some of these questions and feelings that came up, to think about what do we want